The night began like countless others, beneath the dim glow of streetlights in Essex, Maryland, just after 11 o'clock on July 28, 2021. A Baltimore County police officer noticed a car traveling well above the posted speed limit. It seemed like the kind of stop officers handle everyday routine, uneventful, and usually forgotten by sunrise. When the officer approached the driver's window, a woman later identified as 33-year-old Nicole Michelle Johnson apologized for speeding and handed over a state identification card instead of a valid driver's license. Sitting beside her was a quiet woman Nicole referred to simply as BB. At first glance, nothing about the encounter suggested that history was quietly waiting in the trunk of that vehicle. But even before the paperwork was complete, something felt wrong. The registration didn't match the vehicle, the license plates appeared fraudulent, and the officer realized the car would have to be towed. What should have been a frustrating inconvenience for the driver was about to become the beginning of one of Maryland's most disturbing criminal investigations. Nicole's emotions shifted almost instantly. Instead of arguing about the citations, she spoke with an overwhelming sense of hopelessness, explaining that she and her children had been living inside the car and that everything she owned was packed inside. Her words carried a strange mixture of desperation and resignation, as though she believed the universe itself had already abandoned her. Then, almost without prompting, she made a chilling statement that seemed completely disconnected from the traffic stop. She told the officers that by tomorrow, everyone would probably see her on the news. At the time, the comment sounded like the emotional outburst of someone overwhelmed by hardship. The officers had no reason to believe it was anything more than frustration. None of them could have imagined that within the next hour those words would transform into a horrifying prophecy, one that would haunt every person standing on that roadside for years to come. While waiting for the tow truck, Nicole began removing her belongings from the vehicle. The trunk slowly filled the officer's view with bags, blankets, plastic containers, and countless personal possessions, stacked so tightly together that it looked less like luggage and more like someone's entire life compressed into a single space. Because the car was being impounded, department policy required officers to conduct an inventory search before towing it away. It was a procedure they had performed hundreds of times before, intended simply to document valuables and protect both the owner and the police from future disputes. But as one officer walked closer to the rear of the vehicle, something caught his attention immediately. A powerful odor drifted from inside the trunk. It wasn't the smell of dirty laundry or spoiled food. It was heavy, sickening, and unmistakably unnatural. Unsure of what he was sensing, he quietly called another officer over and asked him to smell the air without telling him why. The second officer's face changed almost instantly. Both men realized they were dealing with something far more serious than clutter. Nicole insisted the smell came from dirty blue blankets that had been sitting inside the car for months. She tried to explain away the insects crawling over the bags, claiming everything had simply been packed for too long while she moved between hotels and the streets. She even volunteered to open the bags herself, perhaps believing that cooperation would erase suspicion. But the officers weren't convinced. Beneath layer after layer of black trash bags and plastic wrapping, they found more bundles, more blankets, and still more tightly sealed packages. Every new layer only intensified the smell. Nicole remained surprisingly calm, even encouraging the officers to continue digging, repeating that they would find nothing except old blankets. Yet with every cut of the knife through another plastic covering, the atmosphere grew heavier. Conversations became shorter. Movements became slower. Deep inside, every officer present felt the same terrifying instinct. Whatever was creating that smell was something no one wanted to find. Eventually, buried beneath the mountain of plastic and blankets, the officers uncovered a black suitcase. It was wedged tightly between other bags, as though someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure it would never accidentally be opened. Nicole stood nearby watching every movement while insisting the odor came from inside because of dirty items stored for months. She even directed the officers where to cut through the wrapping, speaking with an unsettling calmness that only made the situation feel more disturbing. One officer carefully sliced through another thick layer of plastic before pulling the suitcase free. The silence surrounding the roadside became deafening. Passing traffic continued in the distance, unaware that, only a few feet away, something unimaginably horrific was waiting to be revealed. Every instinct told the officers to prepare themselves, but nothing could truly prepare a human being for what they were about to see. As the suitcase was finally opened, Time seemed to stop. The moment lasted only seconds, yet for everyone standing there, it would remain frozen in memory forever. The officer's expression collapsed into absolute horror as he stumbled backward, shouting commands almost instinctively. Nicole was forced to the ground and placed in handcuffs while officers secured everyone at the scene. Inside the suitcase lay the decomposed remains of a small child. The realization hit with overwhelming force. Hardened police officers who had spent years responding to violent crimes found themselves physically shaking. One struggled to breathe, another turned away, unable to continue looking. Others rushed for gloves and masks as the reality settled over them. This was no longer a traffic stop. It was the discovery of a dead child hidden inside the trunk of a car that had been driving through Maryland's streets for months, unnoticed by everyone who had passed beside it. Even after Nicole was placed under arrest, the nightmare wasn't over. Officers attempted to maintain control of the scene, but emotions overwhelmed many of them. Some paced back and forth in silence, while others fought back tears or nausea. One officer repeatedly reminded his colleagues to stay focused, because they still didn't know exactly what they were dealing with. The child inside the suitcase appeared to have been there for an extended period of time, wrapped carefully beneath blankets and layers of plastic. The smell of decomposition had become almost unbearable, clinging to the air and the officers' uniforms alike. Yet despite the overwhelming emotional shock, they knew they had an obligation to continue searching. Every piece of evidence mattered. Every unopened bag now represented another terrifying unknown, the fear that something even worse might still be hidden. Inside the vehicle slowly settled into everyone's minds. When homicide investigators were notified, officers cautiously examined the suitcase from a closer distance. The child's tiny body appeared severely decomposed, making identification impossible at the scene. One officer quietly estimated the victim looked around 5 years old. Another stared silently, thinking about his own daughter, who was nearly the same age. Years of law enforcement experience offered no protection against moments like this. Crimes involving children pierced through every layer of professional detachment. Conversations became whispers as officers discussed obtaining search warrants, locating family members, and preserving every piece of evidence. Yet beneath the professionalism was a haunting question that none of them could answer. Who was this little girl? How had she ended up inside a suitcase? And perhaps most disturbing of all, had anyone been looking for her at all? Nicole and Bibi were transported separately to the police station, while detectives and forensic investigators remained at the scene. During the drive, Nicole repeatedly insisted that Bibi knew nothing about what had been discovered, and begged officers not to blame her friend. Bibi herself appeared frightened and deeply confused, struggling to understand why she had been arrested. At the station, the two women were placed in separate interview rooms while investigators worked through the growing mountain of evidence. Nicole sat quietly for long stretches before suddenly speaking to herself, replaying the events of the traffic stop over and over again. She criticized herself for allowing officers to cut open the bags, muttering that she should have realized where everything was leading. Meanwhile, officers noticed that the foul odor surrounding Nicole had become so overwhelming that they were forced to spray deodorizer throughout the room and even bring in specialized equipment to filter the air. Back at the crime scene, however, investigators made another discovery that transformed an already horrifying case into something almost unimaginable. Hidden beneath more bags and containers, they uncovered a second set of human remains, this time belonging to a young boy. Like the first child, his body had been wrapped carefully inside blankets and concealed beneath multiple layers of plastic. The realization struck investigators with devastating force. This wasn't a single tragic death. 2 children had been hidden inside Nicole Johnson's vehicle while she continued driving from hotel to hotel, carrying their bodies through ordinary neighborhoods as if nothing had happened. What began as a routine speeding violation had now become one of the darkest child abuse investigations Baltimore County had ever faced, and the most painful questions were still waiting to be answered. The investigation quickly shifted from the roadside to the interrogation room, where detectives faced a woman whose behavior seemed to swing unpredictably between grief, confusion, and unsettling calmness. Nicole claimed she had no idea a child's body was hidden in the trunk, insisting she believed the terrible odor came from a dead rat somewhere inside the vehicle. She described how she and her friend had repeatedly cleaned the car, washed the engine, and sprayed air fresheners in a desperate attempt to eliminate the smell. To investigators, the explanation sounded impossible. The odor of human decomposition is unlike anything else. and the officers who had opened the trunk knew instantly what they had encountered. Still, Nicole continued offering vague, contradictory answers, speaking as though she were merely another victim caught inside an unfortunate situation rather than the person responsible for transporting two dead children across Maryland. Every answer created new questions, and detectives sensed she was carefully avoiding the truth as forensic teams processed the vehicle. The identities of the two children slowly emerged, revealing an even more heartbreaking reality. The victims were not strangers. They were 7-year-old Marie James Johnson and 5-year-old Larry Darnell O'Neill, Nicole's own niece and nephew. Nearly 2 years earlier, the children's mother had temporarily left them in Nicole's care because she was struggling to provide for them. According to family members, the arrangement was supposed to be temporary, until life became more stable. Instead, the children seemed to disappear from everyone's lives without anyone realizing the unimaginable truth. Nicole continued communicating with relatives through text messages, often making excuses about why visits needed to be postponed. Family members believed the children were safe. They had no idea they had already been dead for months, hidden inside a suitcase in plastic containers, while their aunt continued pretending everything was normal. That deception transformed the case from a horrifying discovery into an almost incomprehensible betrayal of trust as detectives pressed harder. Nicole's carefully constructed story began to collapse. When shown photographs of the children, she admitted they had lived with her, but struggled to answer even the most basic questions about them. She could not accurately remember birthdays or consistently spell Joshin's name, despite insisting she had cared for them like her own. She blamed their mother for abandoning them and claimed she had sacrificed everything to raise them, describing herself as the only person willing to protect them. Yet investigators had already collected messages showing the children's mother regularly checking on them, sending money, and repeatedly asking to see them. Nicole had consistently refused those requests, inventing excuses that kept the children isolated from everyone who loved them. Each contradiction chipped away at the image she desperately tried to present, exposing a pattern of deception that had continued long after both children had vanished. Nicole lowered her head and quietly admitted that Joshin's death had been an accident. According to her account, the little girl had repeatedly gotten into trouble by taking food and disobeying instructions. Already overwhelmed by financial struggles, homelessness, and emotional instability, Nicole claimed her frustration finally exploded into violence. She admitted striking the child repeatedly as punishment. During the beating, Joshin fell backward onto the hard floor and stopped responding. Panic replaced anger almost instantly. Nicole said she desperately tried hitting the child's chest, hoping she would wake up, before lying beside her for hours in disbelief. But instead of calling emergency services or seeking medical help, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She placed her niece's body inside a suitcase, wrapped it in blankets, and began carrying it with her everywhere she went, hiding the truth from the world while convincing herself she could somehow outrun it. Detectives compared Nicole's confession with statements gathered from hotel employees and former neighbors. Their accounts painted a deeply disturbing picture of the children's final months. Witnesses remembered hearing Nicole screaming at Joshin through thin motel walls, often followed by the little girl's desperate cries begging her to stop. Others described seeing the children looking unusually small and withdrawn, rarely smiling and appearing afraid to speak. Medical experts would later determine that both children were severely underweight for their ages, suggesting prolonged neglect and malnourishment rather than isolated incidents of abuse. The physical evidence told a story that Nicole's words could not erase. This had not been a single tragic mistake brought on by one moment of anger. Investigators increasingly believed the children had endured months of suffering before their lives came to an end. Attention then turned to 5-year-old Larry, whom Nicole affectionately called Stink. Unlike her description of Joshin's death, Nicole struggled to explain exactly what had happened to him. She claimed they had simply been playing together when he somehow injured his leg. According to her version, she noticed blood on his clothing only after he began acting unusually tired. She insisted she never understood how seriously he was hurt and believed the injury might have struck an important artery. Yet forensic examinations found no evidence supporting that explanation. Instead, Larry's body showed numerous bruises and signs of physical trauma similar to those found on his sister. Nicole recalled one heartbreaking memory with painful clarity. Before losing consciousness, Larry quietly asked if she could lay him down because he was tired. She said she placed him on the back seat of the car, stepped away briefly, and returned to find him unresponsive. Once again, Instead of seeking help, she concealed his body beside his sister's, allowing another innocent child to disappear without a trace. As detectives reconstructed the timeline, they discovered the full extent of Nicole's deception. Even after Joshin's death, she continued sending text messages that made it appear the little girl was still alive. She reassured family members that both children were doing well, accepted financial assistance intended for their care, and repeatedly postponed visits with excuses that prevented anyone from seeing them. Months later, after Larry also died, Nicole continued traveling between hotels, carrying both children's remains inside her vehicle, while living what appeared to be an ordinary life. Surveillance footage, phone records, and witness statements showed her shopping, meeting people, and even attempting to earn money through prostitution, all while the bodies remained hidden only a few feet away. The unimaginable had somehow become her daily routine, and with each passing day, the possibility of saving the truth grew smaller. Investigators searched one of the hotel rooms Nicole had recently occupied and discovered 2 decorative teddy bears, one pink and one blue, with ribbons reading "Always" and "Forever." Nearby sat a pair of stuffed animals, but there were no children's clothes, toys, or belongings that suggested Joshin or Larry had been alive there. Detectives couldn't determine whether the bears were intended as memorials or simply another disturbing coincidence, but the room reflected a life consumed by secrets. Medical examiners later concluded that both children's exact causes of death could not be determined because of the advanced decomposition of their remains. However, overwhelming evidence of abuse, neglect, and severe malnutrition led investigators to classify both deaths as homicides. Every new piece of evidence pointed toward the same devastating conclusion. These children had suffered for far too long, and no adult had stepped in before it was too late. Months after the arrests, prosecutors assembled an extensive case against Nicole Michelle Johnson. She faced numerous felony charges, including first-degree child abuse resulting in death, child neglect, assault, failure to report the deaths of minors, and unlawful disposal of human remains. During court proceedings, the horrifying details uncovered by investigators left little room for doubt about what had happened. In August 2024, Nicole pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree child abuse resulting in death, bringing an end to one of Maryland's most disturbing criminal cases without the need for a lengthy trial. In February 2025, the court sentenced her to life in prison, suspending all but 50 years, followed by an additional period of supervised probation should she ever be released. For the legal system, the case had reached its conclusion, but for the families, investigators, and officers who had witnessed the discovery, closure would never truly exist. The story of Joshin and Larry is more than a tale of unimaginable cruelty. It is a heartbreaking reminder of how vulnerable children can disappear in plain sight when neglect, isolation, and abuse remain hidden behind closed doors. 2 young lives slowly faded away without attending school, seeing doctors, or being reported missing, exposing painful failures that stretched far beyond a single individual. What began as an ordinary traffic stop became the moment the silence surrounding those children finally ended. The officer who first noticed an unusual smell that summer night could never have imagined he was about to uncover a tragedy that would shock the nation. Sometimes history changes not because someone was searching for evil, but because one person trusted the feeling that something wasn't right, and in this case, that instinct finally gave to forgotten children the voice they had been denied for far too long.